Hello there, I'm not gonna ask you to subscribe to this channel, not until you find this video to be interesting, and I guess you will. Well, they say chess is boring, people just play same openings, same gambits, same tricks. Please let me know what you think about this in the comment section down below. But that is the reason why I'm here to try and make our lovely game of chess interesting with some new opening ideas, such as the one that I'm about to show you right now. So here white starts with pawn to d4, and as you can see by the arrows, these are the most common responses: pawn to d5, or knight f6, or pawn to e6, pawn to g6, etc. But to confuse the enemy and still have a very solid and tricky game, I recommend the move pawn to b5. Oh, wait a second. This is known as the Polish defense. It has been there for ages. It's very much playable, even in classical games, and you can also make it as your main weapon, even in your bullet blitz and rapid matches. Spoiler alert, our main goal with this opening is to give white one more chance to go back to the e4 opening, which they will do most of the times. In point of fact, e4 is the top played move in both the Lichess and the Masters database. So from here we see pawn to e4. Now, as you can see by the arrows, the normal way of playing the Polish defense is by going pawn to s6 on move 2, or simply bishop b7. But I want to introduce this new idea to you guys, knight to f6. But what is new about the lines that I'm about to show you is the strategy. Watch. Right here, white cannot take our pawn on b5. That is logical because as white, you don't want to lose your center pawn in exchange for a flank pawn. So you won't see your opponents taking on b5. Almost all of them go pawn to e5. That's a more logical move, by the way. There is no reason for white to avoid this move. So after this, I recommend you go knight to d5 and whoops. Welcome back to the O'Sullivan defense, O'Sullivan Gambit once again, ladies and gentlemen. Now I call this an improved version of the O'Sullivan defense. Here it's like we started with the O'Sullivan defense. Let me show you. The O'Sullivan defense is where white begins with pawn to e4 and then we play knight to f6, simply attacking the pawn on e4, then e5, which is by far the most played move, and then we play knight d5. Then they continue with pawn to d4, even though they can also play pawn to c4. Then right here we play pawn to b5. This is the position that you guys saw in our Polish defense. The only major problem with the O'Sullivan defense is that white has an option to avoid the O'Sullivan Gambit by playing pawn to c4 on move number 3. What I'm talking about is, instead of d4 by white, white can play pawn to c4. After which we go knight b6, they play pawn to d4, then we play pawn to d6, f4, we take, they take, we develop our knight on c6, pressurizing the d4 pawn. I mean, yes, we're gonna have a normal O'Sullivan defense game, but the main area of our meat is to achieve this position where our pawn is on b5. So after pawn to b5, you will see most of your opponents taking on b5. I mean, that's the top engine move, by the way, because that's just a free pawn. And that's what we wanted white to play. Because after this, we are going to play this sneaky move again, pawn to c5. Ah, Kaspa, are you repeating the same stuff that you showed in the O'Sullivan defense? Nope. In this video, I'm going to try as much as possible to fill the gaps that I left in my last video on the O'Sullivan defense, which is already in the card above. But for those of you guys who didn't have a chance to watch that video, just to show you what is happening here, if pawn takes on c5, we have this move queen a5 check, which would end up winning the bishop after, let's say, knight c3, because we're going to take white's knight and the bishop on b5 will fall. So we are just going to be up a piece in this line. So they may play pawn to c3 because they know that if you take the bishop on b5, they are going to take your knight on d5. Except that we have this move bishop b7. I covered these stuffs in my last video. You can check it out. The link is in the card above. What else? After white takes our free pawn and then we play pawn to c5, sacrificing one more pawn. If black doesn't take on c5, we saw that white can also play pawn to c4 here, which is another move that you're going to see oftentimes by white. So here I recommend you still ignore this threat of white taking your knight. You just go c takes d4, and if they take your knight, the bishop still falls. Oh, and by the way, with this line we'll just end up having equal material. Here Stockfish wants white to play knight d2. Otherwise, if queen d2, here we just go on and take the bishop on b5. If queen takes on d4, which again is the most popular move, here we just go bishop s6. There are some problems on f1 here. And if the knight moves away, there's a mate coming on e2. Well, back to this position, instead of d takes c5 or pawn to c4, white can also play bishop c4. Now after bishop c4, allow me to clarify one deliberate error that I made in my last O'Sullivan Gambit video. Yeah, of course I made that error intentionally and you will see why. So here, bishop b7 is obviously the top engine move and you should be fine as black from here. But hey, humans don't think like robots. Here you can still play c takes d4 and still be able to confuse the poor humans, especially in blitz and rapid matches. So let's just take the pawn, allowing white to take our free piece, cause we still have this continuation, queen a5 check, and we'll end up winning back our piece, which we sacrificed earlier. But see, white can play knight to c3 in this position. And it was here where I told you that the fancy looking move d takes c3 may confuse a lot of your opponents and probably make you win a lot of your blitz and rapid matches with it. Even though it is not objectively the best move because of white's hidden move pawn to b4, which is very difficult to see promptly on human level. However, what I didn't tell you in the last O'Sullivan Gambit video about this position was that if you don't want to be fancy by playing d takes c3, you can play a more solid move, knight to c6. And there is little that white can do about that. Let me show you. E.g., if we choose to take on c3, just like I mentioned earlier on, white can play pawn to b4, which is the correct move, but the whole reason of playing d takes c3 is to give white a chance to blunder with bishop takes a8, thinking he has taken the free rook, and then we play c takes on b2, that's a discovery check. And after bishop d2 covering the check, we give white one more check by taking the pawn on e5, and after let's say knight e2, we then promote our pawn to a queen. This is a fancy way of playing this line. But if you are playing against a higher rated opponent, you may find yourself in trouble after d takes c3 and then white plays pawn to b4. Because this is a killer move, you will just end up losing a free rook this time on a8. So again, we just played knight to d5 since the pawn was attacking our knight, and then white takes our free pawn on b5. Then we give him another pawn. And instead of playing any of these highlighted moves, white plays bishop c4, attacking our knight on d5. Then instead of playing bishop b7, a more standard move, we just go on to take on d4. Because we know that anyways we are going to win back our piece. But white plays this sneaky move, knight to c3. So instead of taking the knight this time, which fails due to pawn to b4, I recommend you just simply go knight to c6. And here white has to give up his knight on c3 because there's absolutely nothing that he can do to save this knight. And not to mention that with this move knight to c6, we are just having a normal game. But surprisingly enough, you will still see white blundering with the top played move bishop takes on c6, which looks natural because they are simply attacking our rook on a8. But after this, the game is now about equal and we may probably end up to win because b4 here doesn't work. Let me show you. We are going to take the knight because next we want to take the pawn on b2 with a discovery check and then make another queen after taking on e5 with check again. But if white thinks pawn to b4 here works, it doesn't because of queen takes e5 check. And after bishop e3 or knight e2 covering the check, we can just simply take the bishop on c6. And now it is us who are remaining with a bishop pair plus a good position. This is suffice to win the game. Knight f3 may be played attacking our queen. We go queen b5, stopping white from castling short. If white plays pawn to a4, attacking our queen, we go queen takes b4. They can castle if they want, but we still have moves such as queen c4 first. Now this is the only crucial moment which you need to memorize. The only critical line that you need to remember, never to play pawn to e6. Because if white knows what he is doing, he may end up crushing you. For example, if you play pawn to e6, white can play knight e5 attacking your pawn on c6 and also develop his queen to d3. So that's why I encourage to play queen c4, taking away this square from the queen. If knight e5 anyways, that's when you go queen d5 in an effort to exchange queens, following one of the middle game principles that says if you have a positional advantage or if you are up by material, it's high time you start exchanging pieces but not pawns. Right now we are also attacking the knight on e5, by the way, you should note that. So knight d3 to stop the queen exchange doesn't work either. That's when we can play pawn to e6, and now the plans are very simple. We'll play bishop e7, we'll castle short, and in case of any attacks on the queen, we'll simply put our queen on a5 and it will be safe here. Anyway, so now that I've shown you a new way of playing against pawn to d4, what is the normal way of playing the Polish defense? In case you just want to play like a normal person, let me cover that as well. Well, so the Polish defense once again is where white starts pawn to d4 and then you play pawn to b5. They'll play pawn to e4 and then you simply play pawn to a6. If they play pawn to a4, now you can play bishop b7 here, because a takes b5 doesn't work. If they take your rook on a8, you simply take with your bishop. Now this is the main secret of the Polish defense, guys. White cannot take your hanging pawn on b5, okay? Because you're going to take something bigger. Center pawns are more important than side pawns. That's just how the rules work. And if knight c3, we can simply advance our pawn to b4. So they'll play something like pawn to f3 here, which weakens the dark squares along this highlighted diagonal. So pawn to b4, we just took away the c3 square from the knight and gaining more space, by the way. Bishop c4 may be played. You play pawn to e6, knight e2, go knight f6. If pawn to e5, we'll be more than happy to plant our knight on d5. Bishop g5, pinning our knight, we play d5 anyways. And just to tell you, if pawn takes pawn, we take back with our bishop. If bishop takes, we take back with our queen. We don't mind damaging our pawn structure on the king side because we'll soon be approaching the endgame and we'll open up the g file for our king's rook. But if they play pawn to e5, which they do, thinking they are putting more pressure on our pinned knight, here we just go on and take the bishop, which is under attack. E takes f6 by white, and then we take with our g-pawn attacking this bishop. If bishop h4, knight d7, our plans are very simple. Look at these pawns that are well advanced. We have an open g file for our king's rook. Where is white even going to castle? Because this bishop is also eyeing this advanced pawn on f3. We still have very good ideas from here and we should go on to win this game. Let's see another line in the normal Polish defense. So after d4, b5, pawn to e4, then we play a6, f4 by white, bishop b7 again. You might not see white taking on b5 with his pawn. They may play something like bishop d3 in this position. Well, here we just continue normally e6, paving way for our dark squared bishop. Knight f3, we go pawn to c5. c5 is the key move in this line, just like in the semi-Slav. So keep this move in mind. Pawn to d5, white is trying to gain more central space. We just simply go pawn to c4, chasing this bishop away. And after knight f6, if pawn to e5, we take the free pawn on d5. So white has to play bishop g5, pinning our knight to the queen. We play pawn to h6. We don't want to keep our enemy's pieces in our territory, this box. If bishop h4, we simply go g5 because we want to take the free pawn. That was the whole idea. And from here, you should go on to win the game. Going back after pawn to a4 by white, we play bishop b7 again, attacking the pawn on e4. Instead of bishop d3, this time you might see white playing knight d2. Well, again, here you just simply continue advancing your pawns. You always want to do this whenever you have a chance. Next, you want to fix your pawn structure on the queen side with pawn to a5 and e6 etc. But white may rush to play pawn to a5, not allowing you to go a5 yourself. Here just go pawn to e6, paving way for the dark squared bishop. Knight g f3 may be played by white. d5. Now listen one more time. Instead of playing our key move pawn to c5, d5 is also playable if we want to play this in the style of the French defense with an improved light squared bishop on b7. D5 makes a lot of sense, especially if we are sure that white doesn't have to take on D5. For example, if white takes on D5, we'll simply take with our bishop and we'll be good from here. So keep these two moves in mind, pawn to D5 and C5. Don't play this in the style of the Peck defense or the King's Indian defense. So E5 might be played by white, just go pawn to C5 here. So pawn to C3, well, you go C4, shutting everything down. Bishop E2, knight C6, queen F4, pinning the knight to the king, knight E7, there's nothing that white can do, knight F5, and again this looks like the Caro-Kann structure somehow. My students who already have my Caro-Kann course know what I'm talking about. Anyways, so this is how the normal Polish defense can go. That is, of course, if you don't want to play our very aggressive O'Sullivan Gambit after one pawn to D4. Alright, I guess you guys enjoyed this video.